Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg meeting with President-elect Donald Trump at his home in Mar-a-Lago on Friday. It comes as Facebook is making big changes, rolling back its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, as well as ending its fact-checking protocols. Here's what President-elect Trump had to say about the changes.
Well, I watched their news conference, and I thought it was a very good news conference. I think they've come a long way. Meta, Facebook. I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive.
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
And joining us now is the reporter you saw in that video, CNN's Steve Contorno. Steve, help us understand the significance of this meeting, the timing, and then the changes that we're seeing.
Jessica, this meeting between Trump and Zuckerberg caps what has been a remarkable few months for the billionaire and his social media empire, and the way it has been positioning itself for the Trump administration. Just take a look at just a handful of the moves that Facebook and Meta have made in recent weeks. They have eliminated fact-checking and other guardrails on posts that have ended their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at the company. They have donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. They have increased the outreach of Mark Zuckerberg and his acolytes to conservative media. They have appointed Republican Joel Kaplan as the new head of global policy, and they also named UFC CEO and staunch Trump ally Dana White to Meta's board. White is someone who was at Trump's convention earlier last summer and also at his victory party and is very close to the incoming president. And Zuckerberg spoke a little bit in an interview he had this week with Joe Rogan about what he looks forward to in the Trump administration. Take a listen to what he said.
I do think that the American technology industry is a bright spot in the American economy. I think it's a strategic advantage for the United States that we have a lot of the strongest companies in the world. And I think it should be part of the U.S.'s strategy going forward to defend that. And it's one of the things that I'm optimistic about with President Trump is I think he just wants America to win.
Of course, all of these moves come just months after Donald Trump threatened Mark Zuckerberg with life in prison if he didn't change the company in ways that appeased Trump. And now, after Trump wins election, we are seeing Zuckerberg make a series of moves seemingly with Trump in mind. Jessica.
Indeed. Steve Contorno, thanks so much. And our panel is back. Brian, start with you because you were talking about this in the last segment. How do you read these policy changes?
Zuckerberg wants to get off Trump's enemies list, and he wants to stay off Trump's enemies list. That's the simple explanation. I think the slightly more complicated explanation that's also true is that Zuckerberg has long resented the pressure that he has felt to police misinformation and hate speech on the platform. He wants a hands-off approach, and now he feels the cultural winds have shifted, and he no longer has to try to stamp out lies on his platform. He can just let it all out there, and he can let the users police themselves. He wants, most importantly, I think here, he wants favorable treatment for Meta from the US government. He wants the FTC case against his company to go away. And I think everything he's doing should be viewed through that lens.
Yeah. Sarah, how do you see it? And what do you think it means for people, working at the company? What does it signal to the people working at Meta?
I completely agree with Brian. This is an attempt to get on the good side of Donald Trump and to get ahead of any regulatory threats and sort of societal reputation threats for the next 4 years. For employees, I think this is a little bit shocking. A lot of tech companies are going to donate to an inauguration. They're going to appoint prominent Republicans in their DC offices. That's not really shocking. But the elimination of fact checks, which was a pretty robust program that they've been working on for many years, the elimination of all their DEI programs, I think for employees, this is a sign that Meta isn't just doing this for political posturing, like they're actually shifting the ethos of the company. And you know this, but tech companies are traditionally progressive. The employees that work at them are traditionally progressive. And so this is probably something I'm hearing internally that's very jolting. The other thing I want to note is that in getting on Donald Trump's good side, Brian mentioned the FTC case, Meta is also establishing better rapport with all of the regulatory agencies underneath him. That is going to be critical. You'll recall that FTC case is about potentially unwinding the acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. It's massive for Meta's business. And we're seeing with TikTok right now, like regulators do have the ability, lawmakers have the ability to really be punitive towards your company. And so I think they're just trying to get ahead of all of that, and they're doing it in this very rapid fire way. I'm sure it's shocking to employees.
Yeah, and Brian, we saw Zuckerberg going on Joe Rogan's podcast this week. He blasted the Biden officials for asking Facebook to take down posts on vaccine misinformation and called for a, quote, new kind of cultural elite. What did you think about that appearance and what he had to say?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, he's like this guy that's been all buttoned up. I feel like he's the kind of guy that's like letting his collar out, like letting his hair grow out. He's letting it all loose.
Like
He is a much
aesthetically,
more
he even looks
loose-
looser, right?
That's what he's doing. Yes, he has changed. And in some ways, this may be a very personal, very, in his part, something that he's going through personally, where he has moved to the right personally. He's become more conservative personally. And that is partly what's going on here, but he's also trying to reorganize the company for a Republican term and for a president who has been threatening him, so it's very, very specific in that regard. But I do think there's a worthwhile conversation to have about where these speech policies should be. Was Facebook being too progressive? Were these other platforms trying to act more like social justice warriors than as neutral arbiters? That's a genuine and interesting conversation. And frankly, he got into that on the Joe Rogan podcast. It is important for these platforms not to alienate half the country. On the other hand, by making these more conservative changes, this MAGA makeover this week, Jessica, I think Facebook might be alienating a lot of liberals and a lot of independents. And we just won't know until we see the user data months or even years from now.
And how it all plays out. Yeah, Sarah, one argument I heard was kind of the idea that, like, look, they had all this fact checking in place, and yet there was still a lot of misinformation on these platforms. Did it actually work? Kind of going piggybacking off what Brian was saying. What do you kind of think of that argument?
Well, I interviewed Meta's CMO earlier this week. One of the things he told me was that Meta was looking at the X Community Notes platform for fact-checking for a long time before they announced that that's what's going to be replacing their old fact-checking efforts. They think that that's a pretty wise solution, because sometimes when you're trying to explain to somebody that they're wrong, they're less likely to listen to you, as opposed to getting community response from something, leaving the post up so no one can say that they're censored. Like, that could be a better source for combating misinformation. I think the real challenge, though, is there is a very big difference in policing political discourse misinformation in the U.S. versus life and death manipulation abroad. Like, the UN came out and said that Facebook was responsible for the genocide of military officials against its own people. That is a pretty serious problem. So in the U.S., we're policing misinformation around Donald Trump and this and that. Abroad, where Meta has fewer employees, sometimes fewer that can speak the native language and understand the cultural nuances, making some of these shifts around fact-checking, I think, is a very, very big deal. But to Brian's point, like, we're not going to know that until we watch how this plays out. And I want to be hopeful and optimistic. Like, maybe this is a better way. Yeah. Maybe this develops better trust, but we're not going to know until we see it.
Yeah, we kind of have to live through it to find out. I do want to talk about TikTok before we go. Yeah, we're all going to live through it. Brian, yesterday the Supreme Court signaled it will likely uphold this ban. TikTok's Chinese-based parent company ByteDance has until January 19th, of course, the day before the Trump inauguration. What happens now?
Well, Meta would benefit. Some of TikTok's rivals will benefit if this app suddenly is no longer updated in the App Store and gets worse and worse and essentially becomes crippled by this action by the U.S. Congress. Will Donald Trump be able to do anything to stop it? I think that is the grand, giant question now.
Yeah. All right, Brian Stelter, Sarah
Not to
Fisher.
stop it, to reverse it, actually, to reverse it in the months to come. Sorry,
right, yes. Thanks to both of you. It's always great to have you, and we appreciate you sticking around for 2 segments. Thanks so much.